Hello lovelies, today we're taking a look at another older game, Rogue Trader, from the Fantasy Flight Games line of Warhammer 40,000 role-playing games, and weirdly I find I don't have a tremendous amount to say about it, which is odd for a, full colour, nearly 400 page book. Yeah, it feels weird to not have that much to say about such a weighty tome as this. I already talked about Dark Heresy and possibly one of the other ones on the channel quite some time ago. But Rogue Trader was the one I always thought I'd have more to say about and then didn't, which I guess is why I haven't talked about it before now. So my history with Warhammer 40,000 goes right the way back to the original Rogue Trader book for running, Dark Future skirmish games, seen here. And what a lot of newer Warhammer people might not understand is that old game book was kind of, sort of, in a way, half RPG in a lot of ways. It had skirmishes that followed storylines. It was much more focused on smaller groups of models. And at least in the very early days, tended to play out a bit more like the more recent skirmish game whose name currently escapes me. It's early, forgive me. Kill Team, that's it. It played out a lot more like that, less models on each side, because they just weren't released yet, and it was far more open for you to use other models or scratch-built vehicles and terrain and all of that kind of stuff, This was, 88, 89, I think? And people wanted a proper full-on 40k RPG almost from the day it came out. But that was, like I said, 88, 89, and Games Workshop was going in a very different direction at that point. Come 1990, come White Dwarf 100, and there was an abrupt and sudden change. White Dwarf magazine became a catalogue rather than a magazine. The shops excised all support from role-playing games to concentrate purely on miniatures and wargaming and their main big properties, and that was it. And this had a tremendous effect on role-playing in the UK in terms of accessibility, visibility, all the rest of it. Now, Games Workshop made a lot of money off the back of it, so it's kind of hard to say that they made the wrong choice, but certainly for the sake of the overall gaming hobby, they made the wrong choice. So yeah. Also back in the day, I enjoyed Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay a great deal. The first edition and the reissue that Hogshead did. Second edition was alright as well. Third edition by Fantasy Flight was a huge misstep, I think. And now it's back in British hands and it's good again. So yeah, Warhammer's still good. This coming out so much later, I mean, the whole world of 40k is different to how it was back then, and possibly the site of biggest difference is Rogue Trader. Back in the day, there was a lot more consorting with Xenos, exploring the frontier, using weird and exotic technology, allying with dubious people, wielding mighty ships and having private armies, and doing pretty much what you liked as a rogue trader. That's still here somewhat, but it has been ramped back quite a lot. Now, system-wise, I've talked about before, this takes a lot of cues from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, percentile systems, stat line, all the rest of it. But it sacrifices the main unique selling point of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, which is its careers system, where you navigate a whole bunch of different careers and thereby create an interesting character with an interesting background through all of that, through the varied experience of your character. But they got rid of that for this, and they tightened things into a much more class level system. It's called a career path and ranks instead of levels, but it's very hemmed in. Now, to an extent, this makes sense in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, because it does have basically a very strict caste system and all the rest of it. So to an extent that makes sense, and you can customize with where your character has come from, whether they used to live in a hive city or they were born in space or whatever, noble born, whatever else. You can do some degree of customization of that. But at the end of the day, the big thing that really marks out Warhammer as a role-playing game before all of these was that kind of open character creation system. And of the newer games, relatively speaking, you would think Rogue Trader would have the most open character creation, character advancement system, and yet it has been hemmed in by the previous games in this line to operate the same way. So you still have a class level system where it is least excusable. So I couldn't help but be disappointed with the whole line, from Dark Heresy through this to the other ones, because of anything, Rogue Traders should have the most limitless possibilities, and yet they're hemmed in by the choices in what are, after all, other games, albeit in the same line. The differing power levels between the different games are also a bit of a problem. If you're playing a Space Marine, you're going to outclass an Inquisitor's group, and you're going to probably outclass a lot of Rogue Traders as well, and Rogue Traders are going to outclass Inquisitor's support team as well. In Dark Heresy, you tended to play the people who were supporting an Inquisitor rather than the Inquisitor themselves, whereas in this, typically someone is going to play the main Rogue Trader and thereby be the boss, and everyone else is going to play their seconds and lieutenants and so on. So you also end up with a fairly restrictive social structure to your group here as well. It almost might be better to have to follow the same way that Dark Heresy did, and have the Rogue Trader be an NPC, and have the other people as his crew, but then they don't get much choice in what they do, what the mission is. That's another problem with, I think, with a 40k RPG, especially a military-based one, is while it makes for easy plot hooks, you're ordered to go here and achieve this objective. It's just less satisfying. I also find that in play, 40k RPGs tend to have a lack of moral depth, because there is such an enormous amount of certitude to all the characters, particularly those from the Imperium, that you can't present your players with interesting moral quandaries and challenges, because they know it's worth torching an orphanage full of newborn babies to get one traitor than than to do otherwise, to let them escape. So it embraces the world, I guess, but it's a lot less satisfying from a story creation point of view. Of course, this is all gone now as well, replaced by Wrath and Glory, which to my mind came way too soon after the end of this particular line of games, and is way too divorced from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and Warhammer as was, to carry the same vibe and interest. I think Warhammer, being such a grim, gritty, sort of survival-oriented game, it gains advantage from the percentage system and other cues that make it feel as grim and gritty as the world is going to be, and a lighter, more narrative system doesn't, for me, fit the world. But we're not reviewing Wrath and Glory. We're looking at this. We're not really reviewing either. We're just kind of going over it. So yeah, I've waffled for about 10 minutes there, but there really isn't that much to say about the whole thing. It has all the flaws of the other entries in the Fantasy Flight line. I don't think Fantasy Flight did especially well with any of their toe dipping into RPGs. I think board game design is a very different beast, which is a shame because I've dipped my toe in board game and card game design, so odds are I probably don't know how to do that properly. But yeah, there's just something profoundly unsatisfying. I mean, this is a completely workmanlike game. I've had friends run successful Rogue Trader campaigns. It has everything that you kind of need. You know, the different ship stats, ship-to-ship combat, creating trade lines and links, all of that kind of stuff. It covers it all in a fairly sort of bare-bones sort of way. But of anything in 40k, Rogue Trader should have had more of a sense of freedom, and that doesn't really carry through in the text or the presentation or in the rules themselves, which hem you in a great deal. So as a result, this has largely been a shelf queen for me, and that inability to present interesting moral quandaries in a 40k universe has prevented me from really running any sort of campaigns in this world, or having much fun with it. The sort of abortive Dark Heresy campaign I ran was just so profoundly unsatisfying because of that lack of interesting moral and ethical depth, because everyone's so goddamn sure of themselves in the Imperium and a lot of the other forces as well. This isn't a review really, this is a look back, but were I to give it scores, I think style-wise it has the visual style as a lot of 40k material always does. There's nothing hugely stand out in any of the presentation here. The baroqueness of some of the pages is appropriate given the background, but it's just kind of it's good enough, you know. It's like a Roger Corman film. Good enough. On to the next take. So, style-wise, I'd give it a 3, a middling 3. In terms of substance, I mean, everything's there, but nothing is really as fulsome as one would hope. And the character options are rather constricted, unless you bring in the other books and wangle and mince and customize with elements from there. So, in substance terms, that's another 3. So that's 6 out of 10, 3 out of 5. Deeply average, and more importantly, I think, disappointing given its Rogue Trader. And of all the 40k games, that should be the one they probably should have started with, and that probably should have been the most open and available to customization and change, and more sort of traditional role-playing fare, I guess. But I have no interest in Wrath and Glory, which is a shame. Zang. I have a fairly mellow Discord if you want to join us there for a bit of conversation and debate. We have people from all over, really, and for the most part, it's fairly good-natured and peaceful. As long as you come in that kind of spirit, you'll be fine.